In this video, we're going to dissect the muscles of the medial forearm. In other words, we're going to dissect the muscles that are on the paw side. So there was one muscle that we were careful when skinning, and that was this muscle here, the brachioradialis. This is actually an extensor muscle which belongs on the other side of the forearm. There are only 4 muscles that will be found on the medial forearm that we're gonna dissect. All right. So muscles found on the paw side are what we call flexors. All right. And they'll have an action in the movement of flexion. Now there is a muscle that we are going to dissect that actually is not involved in flexion. It's a pronator. So it's going to be involved with the pronation, okay, pronation of the wrist. Right. So just like before in the lateral forearm, there's a lot of connective tissue that we have to remove, and it's going to be this tough fibrous kind. So I will start you off, and then we are going to actually spend a little time removing this connective tissue, and then I'll bring you back and show you the rest of the dissection, the separation of the individual muscles. So just like before, this tough fibrous connective tissue, you want to get underneath. You can either do that with your tip of your forceps, right? If you can, if you're careful, you don't want to scratch the muscle. Or if you're really good and ambidextrous, you can lift with the forceps and then use the scalpel and poke a hole through it, and then from there take your scissors to kind of make the hole bigger. Right? Just understand, be careful not to cut the muscle. You don't want to cut too deep. There are going to be multiple layers of connective tissue, just like in the lateral forearm. So you'll have to peel layer by layer, and it will be tedious. So this is the start of it. So go ahead and take a few minutes to remove the connective tissue, and then I will bring you back to show you the dissection of the 4 muscles found on the flexor side of the medial forearm. So I've removed as much of the surface connective tissue as I could, and I've cleaned it up a little bit, but I have left some connective tissue, especially the connective tissue found between the muscles, because I wanted to show you how to dissect the muscles. All right, so once again, here's the brachioradialis. That's actually on the extensor side. This here is the extensor carpi radialis, which is also on the extensor side. So these 2 muscles, do not include them with the flexors, or do not include them on the medial side of the forearm. The first muscle that you are going to identify, beginning on the thumb side of the medial forearm, is this muscle right here. So if you take your probe, you can actually separate this muscle with your probe as such until you end up with this by itself. It's kind of like a triangular shaped muscle from a superior view, from this top view here. But this muscle right here is called the pronator teres. So the next muscle is going to actually be next to the pronator teres, and we're going to dissect that one out here. So you have to look for, again, where does one muscle meet another. So I'm carefully removing connective tissue. All right, pry open to see more connective tissue. So if I pull this muscle here, you can see there's connective tissue right here, so I can go ahead and remove that. And this connective tissue, you can see, is pretty flimsy. I can use my forceps and I just gently kind of move it away. This excess connective tissue you can get rid of. Again, it'll help you with your view of your muscle. So we're going to keep going with the connective tissue. Then I'm going to take my blunt probe, and I'm just going to do a little bit of more separation. All right, there's a little resistance down here. Let's try using the forceps again. All right, let's take a look. Make sure that I have all parts of that muscle. So it looks like I'm done. As you can see, this muscle right here. Here's the muscle right here. This is called the flexor carpi radialis. So its flexor describes the action, carpi describes the action it has on the wrist, right, carpals, and then radialis is because it's found on the thumb side. Next to the flexor carpi radialis is this muscle here. This is going to be a broad, big, broad, flat muscle called the palmaris longus. So like the palm of your hand is big, broad, and flat, the palmaris longus is also big, broad, and flat. So I've already dissected this side of the palmaris longus when I separate it from the flexor carpi radialis. Now I'm just going to work on this side. So hopefully you can see that. Just going to pick on this side here. Again, connective tissue. If I lift the palmaris longus, I can see where the connective tissue is. I'm just simply going to pick at that. All right. So all these frayed ends I'm going to eventually clean up with some scissors, because you can see all this stuff just really makes the dissection look ugly, in my opinion. So you want to take the time to clean that up. If you have a fresh scalpel blade, it might be a little easier. Right, so I just put a fresh one on. You can see how easy that is. All right. So here is the opening of this end, or I don't want to say opening, but here's one side of the palmaris longus. So I'm just going to use my probe to free up the connective tissue underneath. Right? Kind of look underneath. If you feel resistance, look underneath. Don't just drag your forceps. You don't want to do that. You damage the muscle. But there's the palmaris longus right there. And then finally, the last muscle is the muscle next to the palmaris longus, and that's this muscle right here, which we'll dissect out here in a second. And that's called the flexor carpi ulnaris. All right, again, flexor describes its action. Carpi refers to the action it will have on the wrist, or it crosses over the wrist, and then ulnaris because it's found on the ulna side. So we're going to carefully dissect this one out. So you might find it easier to dissect the flexor carpi ulnaris by its tendon, so down by the wrist. So again, I'm just picking at the connective tissue with my forceps. And then it's pretty easy. I mean, you can take your probe, you can kind of see, hopefully you can kind of see that. Just take your probe and kind of move connective tissue with your probe. This is a little tough. I'm actually going to take my scissors and just go ahead and cut. Connect the tissue. All right. So here, all right, so here is your flexor carpi ulnaris, right here, right? Flexor carpi ulnaris. All right, so recapping all of the muscles, the 4 muscles that you have to dissect out on the flexor side. The first muscle is this muscle here by the elbow. That's called the pronator teres. Below the pronator teres is this muscle right here, called the flexor carpi radialis. Next to the flexor carpi radialis is the palmaris longus, and then on the lateral side, right, or by the pinky side, you have this muscle here called the flexor carpi ulnaris. And that concludes the video on how to dissect the muscles found on the medial side of the forearm.